Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We always start with the name of God in Islam. And good evening to you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And thank you, Richard. It's so nice not to be introducing for once, because I'm normally introducing the lectures. Oh, that's good. So the title of my talk, The Ecological Wisdom of the Islamic Gardens of Paradise, was inspired by a conference on sustainability that I took part in last year in Malaysia. And it's given me much food for thought. What does this mean? How does it relate to the vital concern of our times, the fast declining state of our natural environment? In 2010, when the King was still the Prince of Wales, he gave an excellent speech on Islam and the environment, which included damning observations about how the obsession with the economic growth, seen all too clearly at the moment because of this looming election, means that we continue to take from the finite resources of the earth and sea. The Prince of Wales then, he called it the divine hospitality, which is rather a nice phrase, and with little concern for giving back. This, in fact, is a picture of the garden in front of what used to be his house, Clarence House. So you can see a fourfold garden, which we'll be looking at later. More than ever, we need to be reminded that to be sustainable means to give back to the earth as much as we take out. Reciprocity is key. And this is the biologist and citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, Robin Wall Kimmerer's main theme. In her marvelous book, Braiding Sweetgrass. I'm just going to show it because in case any of you want to look further, I highly, highly recommend this. Just as Mother Nature gives back to us, we should give back to her. And this simple act means the earth remains sustainable. She calls this the honourable harvest. Thanks. But such is the greed that dominates humanity. This notion of reciprocity has become a fairy tale for the majority. However, I would argue that if we took heed of what the Qur'an teaches, we would understand that reciprocity is also a key principle of the Islamic view of the environment. So before looking at the Gardens of Paradise and their ecological wisdom, I'd like to share something about the close relationship between Islam and nature, since this underpins the focus of this talk. As the foremost voice on this subject, Professor Syed Hussein Nas has said, out of the approximately 6,000 verses in the Qur'an, 1/3 of them speak of nature, more than any other scripture in the world, in part possibly from Taoism and Shintoism. When you read it, there is a strong sense of the presence of the natural world and how we can learn from it. Animals, plants, water, fruit, and trees, and the colour green are mentioned over and over again, particularly in regard to the Gardens of Paradise, where not only is the vegetation green, but the inhabitants wear, to quote, green garments of silk and brocade. Nature is palpable in a way that reading the Bible, for example, is not. Examples from the plants and animal kingdom are used repeatedly as signs and lessons to humanity. Indeed, nature is teaching us in this holy book. There are chapters with titles such as the bee, the cow, the spider, the ant, the stars, and the dawn. And the chapter called The Sun begins, by the sun and his brightness, and the moon when she follows him, and the day when it revealeth him, and the night when it enshroudeth him. This verse is a reminder of the natural rhythm of the day and the night, light and dark. This should be especially apparent for Muslims, since we pray 5 times a day, and we do this according to the passage of the sun across the sky. However, which of us tells the time of prayer by the position of the sun? Not many, I'm guessing. We check on Google. Speak for myself. And to be fair, with high buildings all around, it's all but impossible to do otherwise. Modern urban existence is not conducive to being at one with nature, to say the least. And the opposite to this, of course, is the desert nomad, whose daily life is really ruled by the sun. I recall Professor Nass saying that you'll never find an atheist nomad. To take just a few more examples from the Qur'an, and we're spoilt for choice, about the lessons humanity can learn from nature and how completely intertwined we are. In the chapter titled The Spider, there is a warning that those who turn away from God are as frail as the frailest of all houses. That is, of course, the spider's web. In chapter 27, called The Ant, when Solomon is marching with his army, he can hear the ants speaking to each other, hurrying to return to their underground homes so they are not trodden upon. A reminder that even a king with his army is aware of the tiniest of creatures and respects them. In the chapter of the bee, the precious winged insects are directly addressed by the Almighty to quote, "Choose habitations in the hills and in the trees, and eat of all the fruits, and follow the ways of thy Lord made smooth for thee." So God speaks directly to the animals as well as to us. We are, it appears, on the same level. The bees also bring healing to us in the form of honey. As the Qur'an says, this is a sign for, and to quote, people who reflect. Clearly, maybe this is easier, although I feel a bit stupid. I think I'll keep it like this. In the same chapter, it's written that the fruits of the date palm and the grapes give forth good nourishment. Again, a sign for people who have sense, to quote, for people who have sense. Throughout the Qur'an, there are warnings through analogy, signs and symbols, with the proviso that, to quote, none will grasp their meaning save the wise. Importantly, the Qur'an teaches that human beings have been given the responsibility of guardianship, or khalifa, from which the word caliph comes, over the natural environment. Khalifa meaning God's vicegerent or steward upon earth. There's also a saying of the Prophet, a hadith, which states, "The earth is green and beautiful, and God has appointed you his stewards over it." But in order to carry out this sacred task in a manner pleasing to God, we need first of all to be good stewards of ourselves, which is partly what Dr. Nass was talking about 2 weeks ago. And what does this mean? Just as a garden needs constant care in the form of nourishment with organic matter, watering, pruning, and weeding, and knowing when to let go and let nature take her course, so do our own souls. We need, according to the Qur'an, to nourish ourselves through regular prayer in order to act righteously. Not a word you hear much these days. To weed and prune away the inner obstacles, and crucially, to try and transform the ego through the remembrance of God, dhikra Allah, so that like the garden, we may give of our best. Everything we do inwardly has an impact outwardly and vice versa. As the great Jalaluddin Rumi writes, the real gardens and flowers are within. They are in man's heart, not outside. Though the environmental mess we find ourselves in today shows all too clearly that we have not been good stewards of ourselves. We have not treated nature as we should. The macrocosm, the outer world, being a reflection of the inner microcosm of humankind. As it says in the Qur'an, we shall show them our signs on the horizons and in themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth. Thus, there is a constant dialogue between macrocosm and microcosm. If we were more aware and took heed of such teachings, if we were, as the Qur'an says, people who reflect, we would work on our inner landscape, to borrow Professor Nass's lecture title from 2 weeks ago, and learn something from the desecration we have wrought upon the outer landscape. I'll move this slide on soon, it's too revolting. But slowly, slowly, there are signs that this is beginning to happen. We are paying for reducing nature to an it. And we need to start doing something more. As the Qur'an says in chapter 13, the thunder, God will not change a condition of a people until they first change themselves. As just touched upon throughout the Qur'an, there is a frame that everything in creation is a sign or symbol, ayah in Arabic, of the Almighty. The word symbol comes from the Greek, meaning to throw together, opposite to diabolic, which means to pull apart. Thus, the language of symbols is about linking the two worlds, not only the horizontal earthly world with the vertical celestial world, but also, and which comes to the same thing, the outer with the inner, the impermanent with the permanent. And it's up to us to learn how to read this language of symbols, as well as the language of practical reverence, a phrase I borrowed from Robin Wall Kimmerer. Not only should we see nature as a symbolic veil, more or less transparent according to our capacities, but we should revere her. After all, it is she who provides us with the bounty whereby we live, eat, and breathe. When you think about it, it's astonishing that we do not all say thank you 100 times, hundreds of times a day, and I'm sure many of you do. This is the language of practical reverence and the beginnings of reciprocity. Today in Western Europe, with the decline of the practice of Christianity and its various denominations, it seems that nature is gradually becoming a kind of religious or spiritual path for many. At the March for Nature last Saturday, "Restore Nature Now" was the chief slogan. You can just about read it there. It was really incredibly moving to see so many disparate groups coming together, transcending their differences for this one universal and profound aim. And I don't know if you can see, there's this lady here, she'd come up from Devon, and she embroidered these swifts on her banner all herself. And I don't know if you can see, but there are stuffed swifts on sticks. I mean, it kind of moves you to tears. She came all the way out from Devon to represent the Swift Protection Society. And there was another lady with her who was from somewhere in Wiltshire, also representing the Swallow Protection Society. In any case, there was no doubt, as the spokesperson of the event said afterwards, that the motivation for all came from the heart. It seems that as the destruction of the environment continues at such an unprecedented rate, perhaps the beauty and transcendence of nature herself will gradually pave the way for an open recognition that she is indeed sacred. She's a she and not an it. And in fact, I don't know if any of you've heard, but there is a move towards giving nature what they call personhood. And that the life force that flows in her is the same one that flows through us all. It's a precious gift from above. The love of nature, which is truly universal, so clearly portrayed in the Qur'an, could really help towards this recognition. And in a way, I think the march towards nature, to restore nature, was a kind of proof of this love. We need, as the Qur'an repeats, eyes to see. And this means the inner eye, the eye of the heart. Socrates saying that this inward eye is worth 10,000 outer eyes. Being in nature, even a park or a garden, especially sitting by water, which is the key element of the Islamic garden, we may allow plants, trees, and birds to open our inner eye and heart and contemplate this universal life force and realize that everything in creation is profoundly interconnected. This is the meaning of the word ecological, which I speak a bit more about shortly. The Quran reiterates the idea of community and interrelationship. In, for example, a chapter called The Cattle, to quote, "There is no animal that crawls on the earth, no bird that flies with its two wings, but our communities like you." The complete integration of humankind as with nature, as shown in the Quran, goes hand in hand with perhaps the most well-known religion rooted in the natural world, that of the Native American Indians. Their whole cosmology is centered upon nature, and to them she is truly a book of knowledge which they can read fluently, everything being a clear sign of the Great Spirit. The sun dance is their supreme sacred rite. And the central tree, you can just about see here, is the cosmic axis linking earth to heaven. Those dancing move between the central axis, the tree, and the perimeter of the circle. Frithjof Schuon writes beautifully, "It is like a great heart whose vital phases are represented by the ebb and flow of the dance." The significance of the tree is mentioned many times in the Quran, and I can just say one thing now, is that the rules of warfare codified by the first caliph in the 7th century, Abu Bakr, it was laid down that armies were to avoid cutting down trees when they were marching or when they were going to war. So, if the inner eye of the heart is opened, and we begin to understand what the Quran is saying, we might try to become better guardians of ourselves, initiating a shift in perspective. This means an actual turning around. It's called metanoia in Greek or tauba in Arabic. First inwardly recognizing that nature is not separate and different from the human being. This is become known as human exceptionalism. Second, this inward turning around would motivate an outward turning around, inshallah, from, for example, industrial high-yield factory farming to farming with a practical reverence for nature. I don't mean this sentimentally. This looks like rather a sentimental picture. I just wanted to give an idea of a non-factory farm. Because in the last 50 to 60 years, industrialized farming has degraded 1/3 of the Earth's topsoil. I'm going to give very, very few statistics here because I think we know enough about it. So unless this inner metanoia takes place, there is little hope for a truly concerted effort towards a restoration of the balance and harmony with nature, and harmony of nature. So in order to perceive the profound ecological wisdom embodied in the Islamic Gardens of Paradise, we need to take into account the Quranic message of profound interconnectedness, together with the link between the ever-changing outer world with the imperishable archetypal inner world. In summary, the true Islamic garden on earth is a mirror, albeit a flawed one, as well as a foretaste of the eternal gardens of paradise. Jannat al-firdaus, described mainly in Surat al-Rahman, chapter 55, which was playing as you came in this evening. Jannah meaning garden and firdaus meaning paradise. In this chapter, the 4 gardens, known as chahar-bagh, described as 2 pairs, have come to be recognized as the quintessential Islamic gardens of paradise. It partly inherited from the ancient Persian prototype, which itself is based upon the 4 directions of space. This is al-Basra garden in Fez, and there is, you can just see there is 4 directions here, divided into quadrants. This, of course, is the optimum and universal method of irrigation. There is or should be a perfect balance between the principal components of this garden, which are, in summary, water, both flowing and still, if possible, closely followed by shade, these 2 being the supreme elements of these gardens, an ordered 4-fold layout balanced with abundant planting, and enclosure, making it a kind of sanctuary from the outside world, whether it be a desert or a noisy, stressful city. I mean, you can see here, I mean, in my view anyway, as a garden designer and gardener, it's not abundant enough. But this is a bit of a problem I've noticed with gardens in the Islamic world. But of course, you know, they have a big problem with water. So, and it's extremely important to conserve that. This is the This is what's called the dismounting yard, a small yard, but it has one of my favorite fountains. So I like to show it. And you can see the idea of enclosure as well as the 4 rills. These are actually sometimes running with water. In an English garden, because of the problems, in an English garden, of course, which this is, it's much easier for us to have this abundant, generous planting. But before continuing to look more at the gardens, it's good to examine the term ecological. The fundamental meaning is that it is about relationship. That is the relationship between all living beings, including humans, with each other and with their physical surroundings. Lord Northbourne, an English farmer and pioneer in the ecology movement, wrote in 1970, "Formerly, man lived more or less in harmony with nature and played his part in maintaining what we call a balance of nature." Close quotations. This is still him. That natural balance, if we could but see it so, represents a fulfillment of the divine ordinances, whereby all living things are related to one another through their common origin in God. This explicit acknowledgement that all living beings are related through their common origin in God is the crucial factor missing in the vast majority of environmental and ecological movements today. Attempting to recover our ecological balance is already an uphill struggle, but without viewing the natural world and all who live in it as a whole, as a divine unity, it is well nigh impossible. This is where the particular wisdom of the Islamic garden comes into its own, since, like all traditional Islamic art, there is no separation between the secular and the sacred, the horizontal and the vertical. If we are, to quote the Qur'an again, people who reflect, we will begin to understand this. William Blake's words, "The tree The tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way. This comes to mind, since aren't we all moved to tears sometimes by the beauty of nature? The question to ask is why? And this is because I venture to say nature's beauty bears witness to this divine unity. It directs our gaze away from the finite, visible world towards the infinite, away from the periphery towards the sacred center, from the visible form to the invisible essence. And an Islamic fourfold paradise garden may help in this redirection, since it is based upon an eternal archetype and is a reflection of a celestial order, balance, and harmony. Today, the phrase ecological balance is often mentioned in reference to the fact that humanity is no longer in balance or harmony with our natural surroundings. This concept of balance is clearly stated near the beginning of Surah Al-Rahman, the chapter I referred to before, chapter 55, where it says, to quote, "He raised it up and set the balance. Transgress not in the balance." The word for balance in Arabic is al-mizan. And interestingly, a foundation, a charity has been set up called al-mizan in order to do something about what we're doing to this, to the earth, to the environment. Not only have we woefully neglected our role as stewards, halifas, but we've abused it horrifically, causing huge ecological imbalance, species decline, and loss of habitation. Shockingly, as I expect most of you know, the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. And as I've heard recently, the huge damage is done by mass tourism. In another chapter, it's written, "As for the earth, we spread it out and caused everything to grow there in perfect balance." If all the elements are harmonious and in proportion in your own paradise garden, they will reflect the order and harmony of heaven. And of course, if you've made the right intention, which I will come to, one of the reasons I think we all like to visit a well-tended garden is doubtless because it gives us a taste, conscious or not, of a celestial harmony, where we can sit in quiet contentment, even if only temporarily. I hasten to add that this garden should have generous planting, as I've mentioned before, to balance the rigor of geometry. Discipline and love, if you like. The oasis may be seen as the original Islamic garden on earth, the fourfold plan arising later and modelled upon not only the Qur'an, but also the ancient Persian paradisas and their watering system. The word paradise, of course, comes from this Persian word, paradisa, meaning enclosed by walls, keeping the inner private sanctuary. Another of my favourite gardens, this is the Sultana Garden, just at the Henra Alife. Jannat means hidden, as well as garden, paradise, and corresponds to the secret interior world of us all. There's so many references in the Qur'an to flowing water and fountains, shade-giving trees, and the perfect temperate climate of paradise. The calming colour green that I mentioned at the beginning is only made possible with water, said in Arabic to be cooling for the eyes, as well as being, of course, the colour of spring, growth, and rebirth. Symbolically, it's the colour of hope and of mercy. And in the Qur'an, of course, it talks about rain being a kind of mercy. which, as any of you know Shakespeare will know, he talks about the quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth like the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. Just to show a couple more of my, this is Almeria in the south of Spain, where you have, it's a reconstructed Islamic garden. They've done it very well. So you can see one of these very nice narrow water channels. And the beautiful, one of the beautiful fountains in the Court of Myrtles at the Alhambra. Water is also a reflection of the soul. It has an effect upon us when we sit by it. When it's calm, it calms us. If it's moving, it may energize us. And have you noticed when you walk around a garden, it's usually near water that you end up sitting? Because it gives one a feeling of contemplativity and serenity. But of course, if even a leaf falls into it or a pebble, the whole of this reflection, this still beautiful reflection, is shattered. And this again is a sign, it's a symbol, it's a reminder of the transience and the impermanence of the world we're in. Another of my favorite fountains in the Karaween Mosque in Fez. The fountain at the heart of a mosque or a house or garden is sort of parallel to the fire at the heart of a house in the northern hemisphere. Both of them give other life and soul. Heart and hearth, it's no accident, they're etymologically collected. As I just mentioned, a key component of these gardens is right intention. Very important in Islam. This goes hand in hand with an open mind and heart. If you intend with all humility to make a garden that reflects the jannat al-firdaus, and follow this with an application of certain practical criteria that we've talked of, then the ecological wisdom of the garden will gradually make itself known. The gardens of paradise are not only clearly founded upon a heavenly garden, there's also the consciousness of the sanctity of the natural world, that all levels of nature are bound together. This is central to its ecological wisdom. Nature is a living whole, penetrated by the spirit. Another element is the harmonious interweaving of architecture with the garden. Whether it be a small house pavilion or what was the summer palace of the sultans in Granada, which is what you see here, a very famous garden, as I expect many have been to, called the Patio de la Acequia of the aqueduct. Also important, but secondary to water and shade, for the gardens of paradise, are flowers and scent. Roses are beloved by Muslims in the Muslim world and are said to have been created by a drop of perspiration which formed on the brow of the Prophet. And sweet-scented herbs are mentioned in the Qur'an. And I expect all of you have come across that, had that experience when you smell something and it takes you right back to childhood. Sometimes I think this with scent. It takes you in a certain sense. It takes you maybe back to our original home, from the garden from which we came, the paradise from which we came. To reiterate why these gardens encapsulate ecological wisdom, perhaps the most important is to recognize that they do not arise from an amalgamation of individual elements, but are the expression of a pre-existing order and harmony, the divine unity, the central message of the Qur'an, which penetrates all of existence. It is ultimately this principle which is at the heart of the ecological wisdom of the Islamic garden and gives it its particular serene beauty. And therefore, I think it's possible that such gardens may offer more in the way of solace in daily life, from daily life. I'm just going to show a few slides of the Cambridge Mosque garden, which I designed several years ago now. It was opened in 2019 with my wonderful collaborators. So you can see a fourfold plan on one side of with this photograph is taken from the central way, and I hope that you see that there is a balance here. We did a very abundant, loose, naturalistic planting. It's called naturalistic planting. It's a term used in garden design. And this was taken quite recently, so it's had time to really bed in, and actually they're doing extremely well, the plants. And of course, we don't have water reels, too expensive to maintain, not enough water. But very often the fourfold form can work very well with the paths instead. But one of our aims, of course, was to work with nature, choosing plants which encourage biodiversity and nurture native species. Anyone designing an Islamic garden today needs to take this into consideration, as well as the garden's traditional principles, all about maintaining the balance and wisdom that they encompass. Now, this was taken about 3 or 4 years ago. As you can see, and it's also a different time of year. And we planted, these are mallows, this is crabapple trees, the blossom, because blossom and fruit, if you read the descriptions of the paradise gardens in the Qur'an, there's a lot of mention of fruit and blossoms, every type of fruit. And when I'm designing a garden here, because of course the context is so completely different, you want to sort of marry these things together. I try and choose plants which speak to me of the Islamic world, which are generally seen, and tulips, of course, are a major example, mostly from Turkey. And I mainly choose species ones. If anyone knows a little bit about planting, the species are the smaller ones. They haven't been hybridized and made huge and large like all the Dutch ones. And yes, so you can see those here. So you have to have this sort of balance between what's happy here and what does actually also conjure up something of the Eastern garden. And you can see the fountain in the center. So the last one, just to show you a little bit more of the planting, and with the rose, I'm very careful about choosing which roses to choose, the ones with the strongest scent, and usually the old ones. Of course, Rosa Damascena, the damask rose, is supposed to have been brought back from Damascus in the Middle Ages with the Crusades. And of course, we only use organic compost, no artificial fertilizers or pesticides, in order to promote as many insects and pollinators as possible. Not much longer now. It's good to remind ourselves, and I'm talking to myself here most of all, that nature is not simply a pretty backdrop to our lives as we go about our other business. It is not another business. It's our business. We as stewards, we need to really wake up and do something about this. We need to nourish our own sacred center, since this single act will nourish the sacred energy that flows through all beings, human, animal, and plant alike, not forgetting that human comes from humus, which of course is the earth. As Sayyidah Zainab said recently, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So how can we do this? Apart from, to start with, outwardly, we could, like what Robin Wall Kimmerer and others, including our king, famously derided for it, greet the trees, speak to the plants we see, thank the rose for its scent, the tree for its shade in the sun and the protection it gives in the rain, the flowers for their myriad colours that brighten our day. This is not sentimentalism. I want to be really clear about that. It's showing gratitude for what is vital for all of us. You only have to look at a view without any green, which I was horrified by the other day when I walked over the Millennium Bridge, to see how impoverished our lives are when there is nothing of nature there. The more we do this, the more aware we become of the depth of meaning of the whole of nature. As the great 13th century Persian poet, Saadi wrote, "To the eye of a discerning man, every leaf upon a growing tree is a book imparting knowledge of our Creator." So if we are discerning, if we are people who reflect, or those with wisdom, or who have eyes to see, all these phrases are from the Qur'an. The paradise gardens of Islam offer, I keep saying whoops. I wanted to have the butterfly at the end, on the Badlian. The paradise gardens of Islam offer us a wealth of ecological wisdom, a taste of the divine unity that penetrates the whole of creation. Professor Nasr has written that to be at peace with the earth, we must at first be at peace with heaven. And let us remember that the only word spoken in the Jannat al-firdaus is peace, salam. Thank you very much.